Furthermore, let's set Lyle aside. The fact of the matter is, the parents' abuse can be proven through means outside of Lyle and his powerful testimony, and even outside of the dozens of very credible defense witnesses who corroborated his testimony on every level, who knew him at all different phases of his life, and many he hadn't seen or spoken to in years, so therefore had no ability to potentially compromise. Let's explore the great deal of evidence that exists outside of the brothers' testimonies, which were powerfully nuanced and credible, but for the sake of argument, we will set them aside. And also, let's explore the evidence that exists outside of the overwhelming testimony of other defense witnesses who corroborated the brothers' testimony. What you are left with is still overwhelming evidence of abuse in many forms, including medical records, disturbing photographs, and dated documentation. Erik's medical records, when he was around 6 or 7 years old in 1977, noted that he had an injury to his posterior pharynx, his uvula, and his soft palate. If you don't know what that is, the posterior pharynx is the back of his throat, his uvula is the small little punching bag that hangs in the back of your throat, and the soft palate is the top of the back of your throat. What could have injured a 6 or 7 year old's throat to that degree that it is mentioned in his medical records? Well, a doctor actually testified that this could have been evidence of oral copulation in Erik's medical records when he was 6 or 7 years old, around the time Erik said his father had begun to sexually molest him, including forcible oral copulation.
Did you see any indication in Erik Menendez's medical records of an injury to his throat area?
Yes.
Okay. Sometime in 1977?
Yes.
Okay, and what specifically does the medical record indicate was injured?
The direct quote is hurt posterior pharynx, uvula, and soft palate. Senior emergency room, Princeton Medical Center.
Okay.
Healing well, symptomatic treatment. Actually, was seen the day before. This is the follow-up note.
Is the report of injury in that medical record that's before you is 299, is that consistent with, could that be caused by child sexual abuse, in your opinion?
Yes, could be.
And what, do you have any opinion as to what type of child sexual abuse could have resulted in that particular complaint?
Oral copulation.
And I couldn't do it. So,
however, we do see an adapter when he says, when he talks about I couldn't do it, we see him go,
and I couldn't do it
like that. And when he says he couldn't do it, I think he's reliving that moment. And when his dad held him underwater and he saw it coming, he's like, I can't do it. And he's going to get, I think he was worried about it all the way up to that point where he grabbed him and stick him under. This is a violent thing that's going on here. This isn't just something where he would he'd hold me underwater. The kid's flailing around, probably screaming, making noise. Apparently nobody else is around.
Mother?
Yes.
And when you were in Israel in 19...
Well, to use lay terms, he was a basket case. Well, he was frequently tearful, sobbing, hysterical, withdrawn, constantly chewing his fingernails, his fingers in his mouth.
She told me to stop it, and that I was exaggerating, and that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
don't understand why there was blood everywhere. There was blood everywhere. Why didn't you hear anything? I don't understand. Try and think. When you left, was anybody around there?
Corroborating the idea that this injury in Erik's medical records is proof of the sexual abuse he suffered are these extremely disturbing photographs. These new photographs were discovered among the parents' belongings in the home following their deaths in a camera roll documenting Erik's 6th birthday party. There's a nude photo of Lyle. I believe he was around 8 or 9 years old in this photo, which is pretty old. He is in the bath and one of his parents is in the bathroom with him and took a photo of just his genitals, which is so disgusting and disturbing. Later in the same camera roll, between photos of Erik at his birthday party and things like that, is a photo of Erik, who can be identified by the birthmark on his wrist, and it is just a photo focusing on his genitals. These photos are real and they are extremely disturbing and obviously indicative of something very gross and dysfunctional going on in that home with regard to these two boys and their parents. More bombshell corroborating evidence of Jose Menendez's sexual proclivities or pedophilia is a member of the Menudo band who came out and finally named Jose Menendez as one of the executives of RCA Records who raped him while he was in the band Menudo. The band Menudo was a Puerto Rican band that had been taken over by RCA Records thanks to Jose Menendez, and Jose Menendez was noted as being obsessed with this band. This band featured young boys who were not allowed to age beyond the year 16. They wanted to keep them very young and vulnerable, and so when the boys would age past 16, they would literally be cycled out of the band and new younger boys would be brought in. Well, starting in the early 90s, members of this band came out and accused the record execs of sexually assaulting and drugging them. Jose Menendez was an executive of RCA Records and helped bring the Menudo band to RCA Records. At the time, one of the main people accused of the sexual assault at these parties was the head of the record label, whose name I'll put here. Then in 2014, a member of the Menudo band named Roy Rosello came out and said he was sexually assaulted by record executives. He said this on a show in Brazil in 2014. So Roy Rosello has been speaking out about his sexual abuse allegations for over 10 years. However, recently, in a documentary called Menendez plus Menudo, Boys Betrayed, Roy Rosello finally is the first person to come out and name Jose Menendez specifically as one of his rapists. This is huge because it corroborates what the sons said about their father so many years ago, which was the reason Jose Menendez was killed brutally by them. You cannot make this up. You can't ignore these glaring facts. There is a reason they killed their father. Now you hear corroborating evidence even 30 years later from Roy Rosello, who said he was raped by Jose Menendez in his New Jersey home. This is huge.
Cuando llegué a la casa de los Menéndez, ellos tenían 2 hijos. Los vi a los 2. Uno estaba sentado bien en el pasillo de la entrada, con una cara tan triste. Ni me saludó. Yo sentí el clima cuando yo entré en esa casa. Sentí el clima de abusos. Yo sentí un clima tan pesado, tan cargado, tan negativo en esa casa, que yo me sentí mal. José Menéndez me dijo, toma este vino, es un vino carísimo, y tómate toda la taza.
Roy, I couldn't react because I had no control over my body.
Yo no podía
They drugged me.
reaccionar.
After that, I woke up at the hotel. I have no idea how I got to the
Me
hotel.
drogaron.
But when I went to use
Y
the
después de
bathroom, I
eso,
was
yo
bleeding.
amanecí en el hotel. ¿Cómo yo llegué al hotel? Yo no sé. Pero cuando yo fui al baño, I was bleeding. Y yo estuve una
I was in
semana
terrible
con un
pain
dolor
for a
terrible.
week. I could barely bear the
Con un
pain.
dolor
I
que
couldn't
no
even
podía
move.
más. No me podía ni mover.
I had
Yo
to
me acuerdo
pretend
que
I
yo
wasn't
tenía
in
que
pain, but the
simular que
pain
yo no
was
estaba con
unbearable.
dolor, pero el
I was in
dolor
terrible
estaba
pain,
tomando cuenta
and
de
I
mi
bled a
vida.
lot. I showed it
dolor
Gardo.
terrible.
Look, Edgardo, my anus is bleeding. He said,
Y
relax,
sangré
it will heal
muchísimo.
soon. You'll be ready again soon.
Y yo le mostré
That's
a
what I
Carlos,
went
mire
through.
Carlos, mi ano está sangrando. Ah, tranquilo. Ya luego se te va a sanar. Ya luego tú estarás listo.
Beyond that, you have a letter Erik Menendez wrote to his cousin, Andy Cano. This letter is significant because Erik wrote it to Andy before his parents were killed. Andy Cano would subsequently testify in the 1993 trial as one of the only people Erik told he was being molested by his father. Cut to, I believe, around early 2000s, I believe around 2003 or 2006. Sadly, Andy Cano died. I believe he died by an overdose of sleeping pills. It was accidental though. And sometime later, his mother, Marta Cano, was going through his belongings and found this letter that belonged to Erik. The crazy thing is that in the letter, Erik is clearly alluding to his father's molestation of him. However, Erik never says it outright in the letter. So it's really sad that all of this evidence is coming out so much later that could have helped them so significantly during the time that the trial took place. More evidence of these boys' mental state at the time of the killings and how traumatized they were was Lyle's stuffed animal collection. Lyle had a massive stuffed animal collection that he was playing with well into high school. And this is actually proven. He was actually kicked out of class when he was 16 years old for playing with the stuffed animal in class and basically raising the stuffed animal's hand instead of raising his own, which is mind-blowing. It's simply mind-blowing.
You've referred before to your stuffed animals. I have some pictures up there.
That's my brother and I on Easter with some more stuffed animals that I got. These are more, these are new, and this Cookie Monster is from...
Can't hear you.
These are new, and these Cookie Monster is from Muncie.
So you...
Looks like me in the background.
So you brought Cookie Monster in to have this picture taken with the new animals?
Yes, that's when I got Cookie Monster. And I believe that's when I got the Sesame Street group. I'm not positive.
How long did you continue collecting the animals and playing with them?
Till about 17, I guess. Oh no, they all had personalities and names, and and they slept with me on the bed. It was a big deal. It was important. I spent any spare time I had, but I would stay up late after my parents put me to bed and play with them in the dark. It was very important, very special.
And did the rest of your family members know how important the animals were to you?
Yes.
Sometimes when other family members were unhappy with you, would they take it out on the animals?
Yes. Yes. The Cookie Monster, well, my mother threw a tantrum and basically broke him because the eyes were attached and the one broke off in a tantrum in my room. And sometimes I would find some in the shower soaked, which is usually my dad. Like the time my mother just threw them out the window when I met my bed. And there were a lot of instances where I was vulnerable there.
Did you get thrown out of class one day because you brought your animals to class and you were raising the animal's hand rather than yours?
Yes.
How old were you?
I was 10th grade, so 16. This was a card that went with some roses that I sent her. I love you. I will always love you, Lyle. It says, P.S. This gift is sent to you from Pookie, Webster, Cookie, Froggy 1 and 2, Theodore, Pinky, Dino, all the Teddies, Lammy, Medium and Little Cookie, Woodstock, Odie, Garfield, King Kong, Snoopy, all the little dogs, including Snoopy the Great Magician, Panda, Rabby, all the other rabbits, Zuki, the Man, Oscar, Old and New, Scooby-Doo, Bugs Bunny, Koala, Sammy the Snake, all the Lambs, Paddington Bear, Pinata, Philly Fanatic, Darth Vader, Robot, the other Pinatas, both Lions, Shogun Warrior, my fish, Indiana, which is the name of my turtle, Chipper, which was the ferret, Velvet, which was the dog, Eagle, and not to mention me.
How old were you when you sent that card?
16 years old.
These stuffed animals.
Yes, but that goes to a much larger issue, I think, than just the molestation. Yeah, I think his discussion of the stuffed animals was really quite amazing. Many survivors have stuffed animals. I believe Dr. Briere, I read his testimony about that, and he said that. And that is true. I think many survivors do. Although I've never actually seen that described in the literature. It's something that people who work with survivors tend to know. But what was phenomenal about Lyle's use of the stuffed animals is that he really, first of all, he had large numbers of them, and he gave them personalities, and he acted out scenarios with those stuffed animals, kind of issues in his life. And he had personalities in the animals, or gave personalities, that sort of represented issues in his life in a way that I've never heard from another victim. He, in a way, was doing play therapy. When we see traumatized kids, we often ask them to act out with animals, with puppets sometimes with a dollhouse, sometimes in sand play. They're bad experiences. The difference between Lyle's acting out his issues with his stuffed animals and play therapy is that there was no therapist there to help guide the process. So his description of how important the animals were and what he did with the animals, he took them when he buried the rabbit, for example, some of them were there, and his collecting other animals that were kind of orphaned by his brother. This is sort of an over-involvement, or it's an excessive use of animals for a therapeutic, to meet a therapeutic need. For example, one point that his mom had thrown a stuffed animal out and the dogs had got it and ripped it up, and he told me that he had been able to save the hat. They're still important to him in a way.
And a whole family of stuffed animals.
When you say a whole family of stuffed animals, how many stuffed animals did you get her?
Like 20 of these white teddy bears that we call them Pookies.
Why did you call them Pookies?
That was because of the Garfield cartoon. He has a little white, or a little teddy bear he calls Pookie. When he gets insecure, he always gets his teddy bear. So I got her that because we were apart so much, as I lived with my parents. And
did you think that animals would be comforting to her?
Yes, they were soft, and they had made me feel safer. And when you're feeling lost, for me, it was very comforting. It gave me, you could have your own little family there in the room with you and play. And so I slowly built up a family for her.
Were the animals that you had like family for you?
Yes, they were. They, especially early on, but really all the way through my teenage years, sometimes they got me through the day.
How did they get you through the day?
Just taking me out of where I was and into this other world of these friends was very important to me. And as I got older, it was embarrassing because really, stuffed animals are for little kids. But they were just important to me.
Lyle had actually called out for help in many different ways, multiple times. When Lyle was in grade school, I just cannot remember the grade right now, Lyle factually wrote an essay about a man killing a child molester. That's something that's not often mentioned. It wasn't allowed into the trial, but that's something that also corroborates the fact that Lyle was crying out for help for many, many years. Another thing that corroborates Lyle was crying out for help is what he told his cousin when he was around 8 years old, that Lyle doesn't even remember telling her. She testified to it on the stand, but on the stand, Lyle said he did not remember even telling her because he was 8 years old and deeply traumatized. Continuing in the theme of things that are beyond Lyle's control that proved he was experiencing severe trauma as a child was Lyle's hairpiece. How much more proof do you need that something deeply disturbing was going on in this family other than this 14-year-old boy was losing his hair to such a degree that his father made him shave his hair and get a fucking wig at 19 years old? That is not normal. It's very clear he was losing his hair due to the trauma he was experiencing, and his dad tried to cover it up by getting him a fucking wig. Beyond that, something else that points to Lyle's abuse, but we don't have proof of this because there are no medical records that attest to this, is the fact that Lyle was wetting the bed until he was 14 years old. That speaks for itself. Other proof that the boys were experiencing severe trauma at home is the fact that they had learning disabilities, even difficulties hearing and speaking. Lyle was extremely quiet. He was extremely emotionally repressed because of his dad literally bullying him to not express his emotions. But in school, his teachers testified that he had some kind of auditory learning problem. Erik had auditory learning and processing problems. Erik had problems writing. This is all documented in Erik's school records. So it's not relying on Erik's testimony, and it's not even relying on the testimony of his teachers. This is documented in paperwork that is filed at the school.
You were asked for your evaluation on whether Mrs. Menendez cared for her sons, and you said, in your estimation, she did not. Could you tell us why?
I can base that statement only what I saw at school. But generally when parents came in to discuss their children at the conferences, their concern was why they were getting the grades they were getting and what they could do to help. When we gave the suggestions to most of the parents at PDS, because they had the resources, they took advantage of it and they helped their children. And in the case of these boys, they never got the help they needed. And in fact, although we all told her, myself, over and over and over again, that this child needed some extra help, she denied it and would not provide it for him, despite the fact that she had all the resources at her fingertips. And this, to me, is a case of pure neglect.
At that time, a month and a half, and I was concerned about his performance. So even though I did not worry that he was going to fail the course, I wanted to call to the parents' attention the fact that he was having difficulties more than normal.
Mrs. Howarth, was there ever any contact made by either of Erik's parents regarding the interim report that you made that was in October of 1985?
No, there was not. They did not respond directly to any of the comments that I made throughout the year.
Okay. You mean they didn't call you or try and talk to you about what you had written about their son?
That's correct. They didn't ask for a conference. Parents often call on the phone when something goes home. They did not call.
Erik had trouble speaking. He had trouble hearing. He had trouble processing what he was hearing. He had trouble writing physically. He also was extremely emotionally disturbed. Erik cried hysterically even as a high school student. This is well documented with his high school teachers and classmates.
Now, was there a particular behavior that you noticed on Erik's part before testing?
Yes. If it were a test that he knew was summarizing an entire book, or if he were asked to take a quiz for which he knew he was not prepared, he would become very upset and he would cry.
And that would be in class?
Yes.
Was that unusual for a ninth grade boy to cry in class?
Yes, it's very unusual. Some ninth grade boys who are under the same or under similar stress situations will either be angry, explode in anger, or will leave the room. But most ninth grade boys do not cry, especially in front of their peers.
And what about when Erik received a poor grade? Would that also prompt him to cry?
Yes, and so what I tried to do in that, I assumed it was a kind of embarrassment.
Did Erik appear to you to be a fearful student?
Yes. When he did well, he was ecstatic. When he didn't do well, he usually cried.
Now, you mentioned crying.
Yes.
Did Erik cry in class?
When he received a poor grade.
And when he cried in class, was this in front of the other ninth graders?
Yes.
Did that happen every time he received a bad grade?
To the best of my knowledge.
Mrs. Sharp, was crying in class unusual behavior for a ninth grader?
Yes, for a ninth grade boy especially.
The other children in the class react to Erik's crying?
Yes, they were very supportive because they were accustomed to this. He cried in his other classes also.
Moving on from that, we can even go to Kitty's therapist. So this is not one of the therapists that was hired as an expert witness for the defense. This is just Kitty's own therapist who looked back on his notes of dealing with her. Kitty's own therapist said she did not exhibit care or concern for her sons. Her obsessive preoccupation with her husband and his affair amounted to emotional neglect and emotional unavailability to her children. She only cared about Jose. He also noted she did not have a close emotional relationship with the sons. He also noted that she seemed to only care about the sons as a status symbol for domestic achievement and success, which is one of the only reasons they pushed the boys in school, is because they wanted them to be successful, to reflect well on them, but they never got them help for their learning disabilities, which is what Erik's teachers testified to. They said despite them telling the parents multiple times and in multiple notes in the boys' school records that they had learning difficulties and learning disabilities, the parents refused to get them help, and specifically Erik. Katie refused to get Erik tested for his disabilities to get him treatment for it. That is neglect, and neglect is abuse, especially if you're going to then turn around and abuse him for not getting good grades, which she did. Kitty's therapist also put in his notes that Kitty mentioned in 1989 that she was hiding sick and embarrassing secrets about her family. That speaks volumes, especially considering the boys testified that their mother knew about the abuse, and this is something they found out towards the end of her life.
So I never felt that I really had obtained the information necessary to really understand her. That I would say someone is, and if you want to use the word secretive, or the information just wasn't there. You could probably use other adjectives to explain how one felt when you're not getting the information that you're seeking. There could be various reasons for it. The woman never was able to articulate, other than there was some problem with her husband.
Another example of abuse that was documented in medical records was a vicious dog bite on Lyle's cheek. You can actually still see the scar while he's on the stand, and it was documented in his medical records as being from a dog bite when he was taken to the hospital. He was bitten in the face by an extremely vicious dog who the parents kept around him when he was very young, and even kept the dog after it bit him in the face, and was eventually ordered by authorities to destroy the dog because it had multiple violent incidents with other people and other dogs. They kept this dog around their child, which is another proven form of abuse. This is reckless endangerment of a child, which also amounts to abuse.
Did you see in the medical history certain injuries which had been treated by other physicians?
Yes.
For instance, was there an indication that when Lyle Menendez was 3 years old on March 9th, 1971, that he had a injury sutured as a result of a dog biting him in the face?
Yes, I recall that, I believe.
While the boys were in jail awaiting trial, Lyle wrote his brother Erik a secret 17-page letter where he was pressuring Erik not to discuss the family secrets. He was begging Erik not to allow his lawyer to take him down that path with exposing and humiliating the family. Lyle was obsessed with keeping the family's reputation, as he had been taught his entire life, but he was obsessed with keeping the family's and especially his father's reputation after his death. Lyle factually eulogized his father beautifully at the funeral. Lyle continued to tell the legend of his father after his death. Lyle actually spoke with a therapist talking about his interest in writing a book about his father's accomplishments. So Lyle was heavily invested after the killings in protecting the image of his parents, but especially his father. Lyle also expressed on the stand deep regret at having exposed and betrayed his father, and it is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. More proof of the parents' abuse and dysfunction was the fact that Kitty brought a gun in front of Erik and told him that she was going to kill somebody. And there is proof of this purchase of this gun, which proves that Kitty was very mentally unwell.
Now, with respect to one of these rifles, you say that you knew that your mother had purchased it a year before?
Yes,
And how did you know she bought a gun a year before?
because I was with her.
First of all, Mr. Menendez, let me call your attention to the signature on the bottom of this page. Do you recognize the handwriting?
Yes, it's my mom's handwriting.
And do you recognize this as a receipt for the purchase of a .22 caliber rifle or .22 caliber gun?
Yes.
Kitty's therapist also proved that Kitty was unwell by saying Kitty tracked down her husband's mistress to New York and stalked her on the streets and took photographs of this woman's house and walked past her on the streets. So when she brought the gun at the same time, it was with the idea in mind of likely killing the mistress or her husband. This was all done in front of Erik, traumatizing him to no end emotionally. But what's significant about the gun purchase is that it corroborates the idea that the brothers were afraid of their parents because their parents were armed. There were factually guns in the house, and these guns were removed by the police after the killings. More proof of the abuse and dysfunction in that household that's outside of the boys' testimony and outside of the testimony of other defense witnesses is Kitty's suicide attempt, which was caused by Jose's abuse and cheating. She went to the emergency room. The emergency room doctor testified at the trial to how disturbed she was, and the fact that she had borderline personality disorder, and the fact that she was addicted to prescription pills, the fact that she was unwell mentally, that she was very stuck in one way of thinking, that she was very extreme and erratical, that she even left the hospital against medical advice, so AMA, due to her husband's pressuring her to leave. So this is proof positive that Jose was an abusive husband who drove his wife to commit suicide, neglecting her children, which is also again a form of abuse, neglecting her children, leaving them behind, leaving suicide notes for them to find around the house, disturbing and traumatizing them emotionally. But also it's proof of Jose's abuse because an emergency room doctor proved that Jose came and took his mentally and physically ill wife out of the hospital following her suicide attempt because he didn't want any more of his own dirt exposed by her being there. This is proof of the severe dysfunction in that household and the extreme abuse that was going on in that household that led to the heightened fear state and contributed to the brothers killing their parents.
My usage of that term at that time would be the same as my usage of it now. A personality trait disturbance or a personality disturbance in our nomenclature indicates a person's behavior is characteristically fixed and is in a long-standing way either excessively odd, excessively angry, or excessively fear-ridden. So we have the odd, the angry, and the fearful. And we use the term personality trait disturbance or personality disorder, or I use it, to denote a person whose characteristic behaviors And those behaviors obviously are a result of the way they think, their priorities, their emotional coping styles, their philosophy, etc. Their characteristic behaviors is rigid or fixed and does not change or adapt when the situation may require more rational approach to a circumstance that is different and therefore requires some sort of alternative behavior.
Right. And why, in this particular case, did you have an impression of a suspect personality disorder?
I was concerned about that because I noted when I took the history that Mrs. Menendez was trivializing her circumstance, her overdose, or it appeared to me that she was. I noted that during some of the time while I was there, while I was writing notes, while I was talking to the nurses, that she seemed quite frightened. There was an interaction between her and her husband, which resulted in both of them wanting her to leave as soon as possible. They did sign out against medical advice. There was a sense, in my opinion, that she was not being honest.
Then you can move on to examine the many self-sabotaging prosecution witnesses and perjurers that helped the Menendez case inadvertently, and they also helped to prove Lyle's credibility. Harry Berman, Donovan Gaudreau, the boat captain, and Glenn Stevens, to name a few. All of these men came to testify for the prosecution, but inadvertently proved Lyle was a decent, good-hearted person, that he was truly fearful before the killings, and that his father had been abusing him before the killings. All of that was proven by these prosecution witnesses. Donovan Gaudreau also helped to prove that even at 21 years old, Lyle was still showering and bathing with his father up until the time of his death, and he thought it was normal.
Partly because there were so many things that I was confused about and so sad about that I was just telling him a lot of things about my life that I felt. I was trying to hide certain things, but certain things just came out.
Did you then tell Detective Zoller, we wanted to go to college really bad. We were getting away from him, you know. We were trying to stay away and doing other things. Do you remember telling him that?
Yes.
Who was the him you were telling him you were trying to get away from?
Dad.
Did he follow up on that? Did he ask you why were you trying to get away from him?
No.
And finally, one of the biggest proofs that these boys were severely abused and traumatized, and I don't even think I've listed them all here. I'm sure there are plenty that I'm missing, but one of the biggest proofs outside of Lyle and Erik's testimony and outside of the defense witnesses' testimony is the rarity of parricide itself and the rarity of the double parricide these two boys committed. The act in and of itself proves abuse statistically. So here I have illustrated that you can say all you want that Lyle was manipulative, but you cannot deny that every facet of his testimony was corroborated on some level by dozens of other, far more trustworthy individuals with zero motive to lie on his behalf. They gained nothing, but they staked everything to defend admitted killers, sometimes against their own siblings. It was also corroborated by a great deal of evidence even outside of the boy's testimony and outside of the defense witness's testimony by the things I just listed. Therefore, the abuse cannot be denied or impeached. This is why the judge and the DA's office had to literally suppress and conceal the evidence of abuse because it was so overwhelming. They could not defeat the abuse testimony, therefore they suppressed it in order to mislead the jury.